All right. Well, today's guest has lived a story shaped by discipline, disruption, and ultimately deep healing. Charlie Peters was once an Olympic hopeful, a young man driven by purpose and promise, until his path was abruptly altered by the Vietnam War. Like so many who served, he returned home carrying invisible wounds and navigating the long and often lonely road of healing from PTSD. But Charlie's story doesn't end there. It evolved. And through poetry, he found a voice for the pain that words alone couldn't capture. His book, Returning Bet's Saga, The Healing Power of Poetry, stands as a testament to resilience and the transformative power of creative expression. And just when you think you understand the arc of his life, another chapter emerges. At age 50, Charlie discovered the identity he had always known wasn't the full truth. The name he carried, the family he believed was his own, none of it was what it seemed. And from a student who once struggled in school to a published author, from craftsman to creator, and from searching to self discovery, Charlie's journey is a powerful reminder that it's never too late to reclaim your story. And with that, Charlie, welcome to the Quixotic Heights podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you, and thank you for the privilege of being with you.
Well, I think we have a lot to cover in this hour together. But I want to start first by saying thank you for serving, and thank you for coming home. Thank you for sharing your story and for being here today to continue sharing your story so that we all can heal together.
You're welcome.
Um, Please take us back to the beginning, to who was Charlie Peters before the Vietnam War?
He was an individual that was highly motivated to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish. My goal was to be a civil engineer, which was what I was studying at the University of Washington, and also to compete in the Olympics. I'd been working for several years, 3 hours a day, 7 days a week in the gym, plus at home, practicing and developing my skills. So those were, and I never ever thought anything would stop me up until the point I received my draft notice. I was unstoppable. Nothing got in my way, and I just kept on pushing forward. Little did I know that it wasn't always going to be that way.
Mhm.
So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay. So when your life path suddenly shifted, how did you make sense of that loss with the trajectory that you were on?
I didn't. It took a long time. Uh, it took a long time to realize that no one has complete control over their lives. And I learned that I didn't actually have hardly any control over my life. If it could be changed in a moment's notice, it would be, and it was. So I learned the hard way that just because you have dreams doesn't mean the dreams are going to come true. But now I realize that it's a good thing to have dreams, something to work forward to. Just because you lose one dream does not mean you can't have other dreams.
Absolutely. So when you, like many veterans, they struggle with the transition home. Can you share a little bit about your personal experience returning back to the US?
When I when I left, when I was drafted, excuse me, in 1969, I was also working for the city of Seattle in their engineering department. And at that time, there were very few women in the workforce in engineering. Health care was not offered as a company benefit. Well, then I was drafted. I served 6 years in the Navy. And when I came back, it was the shock of a lifetime. It was like I returned to a foreign country. It took me a couple of months to just find someone that would hire me after visiting two or three companies a day for 2 months. Finally got hired. And what I noticed right away was half the workforce were women
Mm,
in the spaces, whereas before there were very few. The second thing I noticed was before I went in the Navy, healthcare insurance wasn't offered as a company benefit, and everyone could afford healthcare. I get out of the Navy, come back, healthcare insurance is offered to everybody, but nobody could afford healthcare.
Hmm.
Just a little twist in the way things worked out. One of the first problems I noticed was now I was a submarine sailor, so four-letter language was quite natural for me. When I got out, I had to watch my mouth. And yet it was the women in the workforce that made it difficult because they seemed to pride themselves in their four-letter vocabulary at that time. So I had a hard time. Uh, and then I started having uh, nightmares. I'd wake up in sweats, and it took a long time. Eventually, my wife would finally recognize the symptoms, and she'd shake me awake and said, "You're having another nightmare." And I appreciated that. And then accidentally, about 1990, I was sitting at the keyboard downstairs writing. I don't remember what it was. And all of a sudden, I had the urge to write something else. So I closed that document, opened a Word document, and I just let the words flow from my heart to the keyboard. And what came out was the poem in the book titled Returning Bet's Saga. It took me several months to finish it, but I began to recover. And the more I wrote poetry, the better things seemed to get. They will never completely go away, but it did help to reduce the influence that I was having. So that's
Hmm.
it in a nutshell.
Yeah. So how much time elapsed between you returning home to you realizing you had PTSD and all these demons started to surface for you?
I didn't, when I first came back, PTSD didn't have a name. So there was nothing we could call it. And by the time it was given a name, I had started writing poetry,
Mm.
basically. So before I knew I had it, I was on the road to recovery.
Okay. So let's pivot to your book because it is a remarkable book. When you decided that you were going to write poetry, did you feel like this was your source of healing only, or did you feel like you had to go through other therapies? And why don't you walk us through that journey of healing?
When I started writing poetry, something amazing happened. I did not realize that I was actually suffering from PTSD.
Mm.
And I had no intention of writing a book, but one poem led to another. And the more I wrote, the better I felt, not only about myself, but about other things that were happening. Eventually, I ended up giving that poem, Returning Bet's Saga, to a veteran I worked with. And he actually, unbeknown to me, made copies of it and started handing it out to workmates of ours.
Mm.
I worked at the Boeing company at that time, contract. Well, one day, somebody I didn't even know came up to me and said, "Can I have a copy of that poem you wrote?" And I said, "What poem are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, the poem Wally's giving out." So I took that as a cue that if Wally can give my poem out, then I can too. So I started carrying extra copies with me and handing them out. When I finished writing that poem, then other things came to mind, and I just started going with the flow, letting the keyboard follow what my heart was saying. And in the end, it turned out to be well over 200 poems.
Mm.
Never intended on writing a piece of poetry because I always remembered what Benjamin Franklin said: poets don't make money. So I had no intention of uh, writing poetry. It just happened.
Mm.
And
So
then,
prior to this, like no poetry was in your life at all? Just one
no,
day?
the only thing that was creative along that lines would be whistling.
Which I
Whenever I
can't
was
do.
outside, I would always whistle. It didn't
Mm,
matter, all kinds of tunes. And so that was, there were other creative things I did. I didn't realize that creativity is a way of life.
mm,
In other words, once I realized I had creative skills, writing poetry and other things, then other creative things came along. I also learned there's a difference between creative people and logical people, left brain, right brain, and the two do not get along very well. I was a civil engineering student, very right brained, and I always fought left brain things. I forced myself to be right brain because the working force was right brain. Well, then I found out I was what I was fighting against, came as quite a shock. But
yeah,
it's been a wonderful journey. Had ups and downs for a long time. It's on an even keel now, although it still goes up and down.
sure. So you've written over 200 poems, and are you still writing today your poetry? And if so, will you have a second volume?
I have enough for a second volume. Uh, a lot of the poems that I actually wrote had to do not with the military, and a couple of them are in the book that you published, but they had to do with me growing up and my feelings growing up. Uh, those came out. Uh, I felt for the longest time, my younger years, that I was in the wrong family.
Mm,
I didn't know why.
hmm,
When I was in probably fifth grade, I asked the woman that was raising me, why do I feel like I'm adopted? And she replied, all kids feel like that way once in a while. I didn't feel like that once in a while. It was an everyday feeling. I asked the same question in seventh grade, got the same answer. And so half of the poems I wrote were on me discovering that I was actually born to a different family than I was raised with. And now that I have all the facts, I actually know that who I thought was my uncle was my father, and who I thought was my father was my uncle. And that explained a lot to me because growing up, I said, why do I feel like dad is an uncle and not a father? Well, it was pretty simple.
yeah. But
Elvin was my father. Norman was the man that raised me. They were brothers.
okay. There must have been something though that gave you some kind of feeling or clue. Was it the way that they addressed you versus the
Yeah,
other kids around you?
uh, it had to do with before they started taking, I had flashbacks and memories of things before they started raising me. And I was probably 4 years old. And I remembered my grandmother telling me, Norman is your dad now.
Hmm.
Well, I'd forgotten about that. And when I discovered I was who I wasn't supposed to be, I remembered that. And then my grandmother in 1993, 6 months before she passed away, I took her out to lunch. She was living in a elder care facility, and I was living in Seattle. And I go down quite often to visit with her. She took me out to lunch, my wife and I. We went back to her little apartment, which is what she called it, which was nothing more than a four walled room, 10 by 10, with just pictures on the wall. And she said to me, she said, Cappy, Elvin's your dad. And I said, Grandma, Elvin's not my dad. Norman's my dad. And she said, Norman's not your dad. Elvin's your dad. And I said, I'm Norman's son. She said, No, you're Elvin's son. You're not Norman's son. That went on for about, oh, I'd say a good 10 minutes until finally I think she got frustrated because I didn't realize what she was telling me. If I'd have just kept my mouth shut and let her tell me what she wanted to tell me, I would have found out a whole lot more than what took me over 20 years to find out later.
Hmm.
So I think my grandmother always wanted to tell me, and Norman stopped her. Whenever he was around and I was around her, sometimes she'd try to say something, but she'd stop.
Hmm.
Now I know why.
Okay, but the question is why? Why this charade of you having different parents?
Okay. Now, the title of the book is Cappy's Story. That was the nickname. My nickname all my life has been Cappy. Nobody ever told me how I got it. But the name of the book is Cappy's Story, Alive Before Born, by Cappy, aka Charlie Peters. Charles Allen Peters was Norman and Mary Lou's firstborn son, born November 6, 1947. And I found out he died about 7 months later. The circumstances are strange. He was either a sickly child or he was knocked out of a high chair. I don't know which yet. And, and I can never find out. I actually, through a lot of work and making a lot of contacts with people, including government agents, found out who my mother was. And her and Elvin were married in Puerto Rico in 1946. She told me I was born August 3rd, 1946. Well, that went along with all the pictures I'd been given. No one ever thought that those little baby pictures I would be able to put together someday and backtrack through them to figure out when I was born. So I was actually 15 months older than Charles Allen. Well, he died. I was ran over by a tractor during mowing season, seriously injured. No one thought I would live. So the baby that should have lived died, and the baby that should have died lived. Well, Alvin eventually left Puerto Rico in 1948 and ended up getting a divorce. Uh, I was too much for him to handle, probably. And so my grandmother started taking care of me. At about 1950, Norman and Mary Lou started taking care of me. Then suddenly, uh, they slipped me in to their dead baby slot. I was given his birth certificate because there is no record of his death.
Hmm.
So that's when I started becoming Charles Allen Peters, was then. And
Which stands
that's
for
the
Cap
name.
and
That's the name
Kathy.
I have now. Well, that's what they tried to tell me, and I didn't believe it when they told me. It didn't
Hmm.
make sense. So and this coming August will actually be my 80th birthday in real life. The first
Hmm.
time ever
That you get to celebrate
that
your
I get to
birthday.
celebrate my real birthday,
Oh my
and
goodness.
I'm going to.
Heck yeah, you're going to. Um, I'm going to.
Thank you.
Um, wow, Charlie. So do you know what your name was on
No
your
one,
ticket?
this is what I actually I contacted my birth mother on the phone. Her name was Olga. And when she answered the phone, I said, hello. And I said, can I speak to her husband's name? I'm not going to reveal their family name. I don't want anybody to track them down. And she said, that's my husband. Who's this? And I said, this is Cappy. And she said, who? And I said, Cappy. She said, just a minute. She got up and I could hear the door close. She came back and said, how did you ever find me? And
Hmm.
so I told her as soon as I found out, I started looking. And she never thought I would find her. Well, I knew something she didn't. Once I start to do something, I'm not going to stop. So we talked, and I asked her, I said, there's just two things I want. I didn't want to interfere in anybody's life. I just wanted two things: my real name and my birth date. She gave me my birth date, but would not give me my name. I also have a twin sister
Hmm.
that I've been looking for. So I asked her about my twin sister, and she said, quote unquote, I can't talk about that.
Hmm.
That spoke volumes. Why can't you talk about it? I thought, if you can't talk about it, why? Because if I don't have a twin sister, it's easy to say, there's no twin sister. However, that's not what she said. She also told me later in the conversation that I was too big a change for them to accept in their lives right now. Well, that was the second uh, moment I had. What was I too big a change from? If I wasn't your son, there was no change. The only reason there's a change is because I am your son. So by her actions, they spoke louder than her words. And so I actually did learn a little bit from her. She would not tell me what my name was, and she would not tell me what my sister's name was. Although I had a picture of my sister and I together in white robes, like nightgowns. We were twins, dressed alike. I know that
Mhm.
sounds unusual for a boy-girl twin set, but on the back of the picture, my grandmother's handwriting is Cappy left, Shaylee right, as if you could get them mixed up. That's a comment you make about twins, period.
Mhm.
Anyway, I called her several times, and finally she said, are you going to wait till I die to come stand at my grave, or are you going to come visit me now? I
Hmm.
said, I'll come visit you now. So she invited me, and that told me a lot too. Why would she want someone to come see her who wasn't her son and would
Hmm.
be opening up a past that she didn't want to reveal?
Right. Yeah, that's a quite the 180, right? From your initial conversation where you're too much of a change for us right now to
Yeah.
come see me. Well, I hope you got some resolution, and I hope that you do continue to write Cappy's story and publish it, because I would love to learn more about you.
Yeah, I
Very fascinating. I was going to ask also, curiosity is, do you think age progression technology would help in this photo of the twins? And then, are you in some kind of DNA, archive?
no, I actually have a hospital certificate with Charles Allen Peters' clear footprints on the back,
Hmm.
and my footprints today do not match those footprints. So
Yeah.
there's no need for any kind of testing. The footprints tell the whole story. They never change. And his footprints and my footprints don't match. In the late 1990s, I was actually on LMNO TV on reuniting adoptees, and they carried my story. And they did
Mm.
an age progression of her,
Hmm.
but she possibly looked like at 50 years of age, which was how old I was when they aired that story. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
that's fascinating. And I think with technology today, it's like you can go on to ancestry.com or, the 23andMe, if they're still around, but, put in your DNA information, and who knows, maybe your twin sister out there also shares the same DNA
yeah,
and is on one of these.
well, I am on ancestry.com and also a couple of others with my DNA, and nothing positive has come out of that yet.
Hmm.
Uh, Hopefully someday it will, and hopefully with
Yeah.
the publishing of the book, it will firm things up. In 1986, my wife told me in 1996 that this happened 10 years before. A woman called from Florida, and she was looking for her brother, Charles Allen Peters.
Mm,
And my wife told her, he said, I don't know of any wife or any sister of his that lives in Florida. He just has one that lives in Oregon. And my wife then said, you probably have him confused with some other Charles Peters. And she said, I probably do. Well, I found out in, I banked at Key Bank at that time in Seattle, and Key Bank had 7 Charles Peters as uh, members. And
hmm
at the branch I banked at, there were 3 of us.
mm.
So,
Yeah, there's a lot of you out there.
yeah. And then in 1991, 2 years before my grandmother passed away, a man called me from Florida and talked to me and said he was looking for Charles Allen Peters. And I said, that's me. Well, to make a long story short, he ran through everything about me that he knew, and it matched me to a T.
Hmm,
Uh, everything. And when I realized that everything he had to have gotten from my service jacket.
hmm,
So that told me that somehow he had information from my service record that he could get. It ended up that I was so brainwashed and my belief system was so strong that I just said, you got the wrong guy. You need to look somewhere else. And he politely excused himself and said goodbye. He didn't have the wrong guy. He had the right guy. So a few days later, I went over to Norman and Mary Lou's house and I said, I had the strangest call the other day. And they said, what's that? I said, a man called from Florida claiming to be my brother and he knew everything about me. And Norman and Mary Lou both looked at one another and got the strangest looks on their face. And I caught them off guard, and all they could say was, yeah, that sure sounds strange.
hmm.
Well, right then and there, they should have opened up and cleared things up, but they didn't
Yeah, and they continued to hold that secret for how long?
until they died. She died in 2009 and he in 2017.
And then what is your relationship now with your biological parents?
They're both, Elvin died in 1954. I was at his funeral, and that was a very traumatic experience for me. And his Olga died around 2010, where she lived. So
Mm,
they're both no longer with us. But I'm
yeah,
so happy that I actually got to meet her face to face.
of course. I hope you got a photo together. And I hope you are able to include some photos in your memoir that, Cappy's story.
I proved through pictures what I found. So there's probably 100 pages worth of pictures and with the story that goes along with each picture that helped me progress from where I was to learning full well who I
Mm.
really am.
Are you still in search, you think, of your other family, your brother, your sister?
I'm, yeah, I'd like to find them.
Hmm
Uh, the book Cappy's Story is probably the last resort, and hopefully someone will read it that knows them or they will read it themselves.
Yeah, I'm curious if
And
you can, like, for example, share that progression photo of your sister from when, of her at age 50 and target Florida as your campaign to search. Because interestingly, my dad had a lot of children,
uh-huh,
and he actually was found by one of his daughters in California. He was living in Texas. One of his daughters was living in California, and she put out an ad saying, have you seen this person? Do you know who he is? Because when she left Vietnam to come to the States, her mom was like, hey, when you're in the States, look for your dad. Here's his name. Here's kind of what he looks like, blah, blah, blah. She had one picture of him. Well, somebody saw this newspaper article in California who knew my dad, reached out to him in San Antonio and said, hey, you have a daughter looking for you, and the two met. He ended up moving, or she ended up moving to San Antonio, and they lived together under one roof for a while, and she took care of him, and just wild stories like that. But you just never know,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know.
that's it. I'll post that on Facebook today and I'll say, has anyone seen this woman?
Yeah,
We'll
you
give it a
never
try.
know. You never
Yeah.
know. So, and we can share and share away, but let's get back to your writing because
Okay.
you've done a lot in your career. But writing, I think, was probably one of the unexpected journeys that you had, especially with the poetry. First of all, would you mind doing a reading of a poem from your book?
Sure. I'll read A Man Less Than His Best.
Okay.
I just revised this today. I think it's a better version of what's in the book. But the poem goes like this: A man less than his best, and excuse me, I have to take my glasses off so I can read. Uh, there once was a man who was proud while at his best. Friends he had who were also proud of this man at his best. Crowds they once cheered for this man at his best. Awards he received for being his best. Proud was this man, and proud were his friends of this man who was at his best. Then award had come for this man at his best. This man did fight, who had been at his best. Then this man became someone no longer at his best. He became, as some would say, a man who was less than his best. Then a wife he would come to have, while less than his best. This wife of his would only see a man less than his best, and not one who was once at his best. She never saw him at his best. She only saw what was left. To that wife of his, he is so sorry. She never knew what was at his best. She only knew what was left. Oh, if only she had known him at his best, how proud she would have been of him at his best. Then children they came to have, children they would love, children who would only know him for what was less than his best. But his children would think this man was best. They never knew him when he was at his best. He is so sorry his children only knew what was left and never what was his best. How proud they would have been of this man at his best. To that family of his, both wife and children alike, he wishes they could have known him at his best. He is sorry they never saw him at his best. He is sorry that they only saw what was left. He loves dearly that family of his because they love him for what is left and not for what once was his best. This man who once was his best would come to know the best he could now be was not the best he had once been, but only the best of what is left. What was left was not a man at his best, but only a shell of a man who once was at his best. Try as he might and try as he could, this man once at his best would now have to settle for only second best. Gone are the crowds and the friends who were once so proud of this man at his best. Sad to say, they never knew what was left. Now this man would become the best of what is left, not the best he could have been, but the best of what is left. This man never dreamed he would not be his best and only be what was left. But the best of what is left may actually be better than what once was his best. Only time will tell which actually turns out best, what was once his best or what is left. End of poem. Even caught me a little bit there for a moment.
I Yes, and you did a good job of maintaining
Composure.
composure. Um,
Uh,
that is a beautiful poem, and thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you, take us back to when you wrote that poem. Where were you at in mindset? Where were you at physically? What was going on?
I'd I'd already written, excuse me, I'd already written the first poem, returning that saga. This was I wrote this not too long after that, but I was again downstairs and all of a sudden I had an urge. So I closed what I was doing, opened a Word document, and just let my fingers do the marching, and that's what came out. I did not think about what I was writing. It just flowed from my fingers to the screen.
Hmm.
Most of the poetry I wrote, that's how I wrote it. It was not something intentional. It was just something I stopped what I was doing and just went with the flow. And what came out were poetry.
Why did you feel like you had to revise or that you should revise that poem from the published version?
Because you let me know in advance you wanted me to read a poem, and the original one is about twice as long as that. And I said, I can't do that to Amy, but I actually like this version better.
Yeah.
That's my
Um,
personal opinion.
yeah. Well, maybe you can include it in I don't know, maybe you can share it on social media or include it in a future book or something. I think it's
Okay.
beautiful.
Thank you.
And I know it's beautiful because, as you know, when you and I became connected, I asked permission to reprint one of your poems
Yeah.
in my book, Snow in Seattle. And I had a whole chapter dedicated to a Charlie Peters and shared that poem. And it gets me and it gets my readers too, because the thing too is like I was like, is this poem too long for this chapter? Should I only get excerpts of it? But then I thought, you know what? The reader will decide how much, or how little, um, how much they can take, because it is a very emotional piece, the returning vet saga, in the book. And I'm glad I printed the whole thing because it truly is
That
remarkable. What kind of feedback are you getting from veterans or just from other readers?
uh, I get positive feedback from veterans. Uh, that was the Returning Vet Saga I'd been handing out since early 1990s for over 30 years. And I probably gave away 1,500 copies of it over that time.
Hmm.
I just want to mention this. When you asked me for permission to publish that poem, I gave you permission. And then after I read your book and I saw it in writing, I said, wait a minute. If Amy can publish my poem in her book, then why don't I publish my poems in my own book? So because you published my poem, I had you publish a lot of my poems in a Returning Vet Saga book.
You
So you're
certainly
the reason I
did.
published it. So if anybody wants to blame anybody, you're at fault.
I'll take the blame because here it
Yeah.
is, and it's
Yeah.
beautiful. I know the virtual background doesn't show it very well, but um, I'm so glad that you did decide to publish your own volume of poetry because there's so many good ones,
Yeah,
in
I
here.
was that I've gotten some negative feedback on A Man Less Than His Best. One comment in particular sticks out. Why would you ever think of yourself as being less than your best? And my
Hmm.
answer was, do you know how many vets feel exactly like that? And it
Yeah,
caught them off guard
yeah.
because they'd never been around vets and they did not know what vets went through when they came back. They didn't know what vets went through when they were overseas or when they came back.
Yeah, yeah,
It,
absolutely. Oof. Okay, so let's talk about your teachers.
okay.
Your high school teachers who dared to say, because you were getting D's in school, right? And they didn't
Uh,
believe you would become a published author one day.
well, I'll guarantee you that my senior year English professor would roll over in his grade because he passed away a long time ago. His name was Mr. Rule, and he was actually married to Anne Rule.
Hmm.
But he would roll over in his grave if he found out that I ever had a book published. My English was so poor that I was accustomed to getting D minuses. So when I got a D, not a D plus in English, that was like other kids getting an A or an A plus to
Mm.
me.
Yeah, you passed.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Why do you think your English wasn't so good? Is it because you were more focused
Uh,
on the math and science, or?
it wasn't so good because I didn't understand interrogatives, prerogatives, and all that other stuff they tried to classify. I just knew to write. I didn't
Hmm.
write books back then, but and it was boring to me. They, the way they taught English when I was in high school was so boring. I'm surprised anybody learned how to write English in a better
Yeah.
way.
So if your professor or your teacher was right here with you, what would you say to him?
I say, thanks for at least not laughing at me. He would have us read some writings that we did in front of the class, and I hated it. He never laughed at me. The other kids did, though. He
Hmm.
never did. He just said thank you, and I went back to my seat.
Hmm. Yeah, teachers, I know they know this. They have the ability to have a lot of impact in young minds, and some of them do really good at it, and some of them don't. I remember when I was in college, my professor said, "Don't even try journalism. You suck at writing, and you'll never be a good journalist." Right? My mind was like, I want to be the next Connie Chung or whatever
Yeah,
and go into broadcasting. But, it's one of those things where a door shuts, a different kind of door opens or a different window opens. And I'm like, look at us now. We're authors. I'm running a publishing business. You're doing your thing. And it's just like, there's no reason why someone's no can't be your try harder and be a yes, right? Um, which I think is amazing. And I want to also talk about your other endeavors because you were also an entrepreneur. You ran your own small business, I believe.
yeah,
The leather and wood, was it leather and wood
yeah,
business?
leather and wood.
Yeah, tell us
Uh,
about that.
I was probably early 1990s. I got tired of CAD work, computer aided drafting. Uh, it was not my cup of tea at the time. So I decided that I'd always worked with leather. I'd always made, throughout my life, stocks for various firearms, pistols, and rifles. I like doing that. Why don't I do that for a living? So I did for a while. I did for 2 years. I didn't do anything else. It was just strictly leather goods and stocks of various kinds. I never worked harder in my life, never worked longer in my life, and never enjoyed work more in my life than that 2 years. But I did tell myself that when I started, I said, when the money runs out, I have to quit and go back to CAD work. Well, it
Hmm.
took 2 years. The money ran out. So I kept my word to myself. I quit the business and went back to doing CAD work, computer aided drafting.
Yeah. Where do you think you would be had you not given up on that?
Uh, I don't, I actually don't know if I would be anywhere different than where I am. And the reason I say that is sometimes I wonder if we don't end up where we're going to end up, regardless of the path we take.
Hmm.
So is the destination is not predetermined, but do we throughout our life find different ways to reach our destination unbeknown to us? And no matter
Hmm.
what we do, we will end up where we should end up in a good way.
Why do you say in a good way?
Uh, because I want to eliminate the criminal element out of this talk at all. I do not think criminals are born uh, that way. So I'm talking about everyone else that has goals Like myself, I had goals in 1969 before I was drafted. Uh, they came to an end, but that doesn't mean it's an end to goal setting, which took me a while to realize. And so I started having new goals, and there's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with that. New goals. You know, once we reach the pinnacle of our goal and we've accomplished what we wanted, that's not the end. That's just the beginning. There are
Mhm.
other goals, other heights, other things to do that we want to do.
Yeah, keep reaching for those quixotic heights, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm one of those people who believe spiritually, I believe that we all have a purpose, a soul assignment, if you will, on this earth. And we have many assignments. This is just maybe one of them. And, we often, one of my favorite quotes with Mandela is, you never lose, you always either win or you learn. And that helps you to reach the next milestone and the next milestone until it's time to to go home or to move on to something else. So yeah, I completely can resonate with that. Um, before we move on, are there any other topics that you want to cover, Charlie, that we didn't cover that you would like to share or promote?
Yeah, I'd like to promote a mantra that's been mine for the longest time. It made a lot of employers mad at me because I would put on my quarterly reviews, it says, what do you want to do with the company? And this has always been my mantra from the time I was in gymnastics until even today. And that is never let it rest until your good is better and your better is your best.
Hmm. How do you know when your good is your best?
Because it's better than you ever have been, whatever
Mm,
that is.
hmm. That's beautiful. Charlie, what would you say to your younger self? Maybe what would you say to the athlete, the hopeful gymnast that you were?
Don't give up. Uh, keep on going. Do the best you can do, because if you keep on going, you will become the best you can become, no matter what that is. It may not be the Olympics, but it will be something that you're best at. And I'm a firm believer that everybody is good at something. And given the chance, they will become the best they can become in whatever field it is.
Yeah, I agree. Do you have any words of wisdom for the soldier that was you or the soldiers who are serving now?
For those that are still here with us, thanks for not giving up. Uh, I know how easy it would have been to call it quits. And in the late 1970s, there was an ad on TV that I never forgot. And I've shared this with people. It went something like this, that suicide is a permanent solution for a temporary problem.
Mm,
Before we ever get to that point, it's time to give a call to the suicide line for veterans. Uh, I know what they went through. Uh, what amazes me is that what Vietnam vets went through, Korean War vets went through, Gulf War vets went through, and Afghanistan vets went through. When they come back, they're not treated like heroes like you would think. Uh, and I remember one individual told me, what you Vietnam vets need to do is forget where you were and get on with your lives. I thought, how ridiculous can you get? That's like telling someone that had been raped, just forget that you've been raped and get on with your life. You don't forget things like that. Uh, we may have come back from a war, but the war never left us. There's still moments even I still have moments, and I was on submarines. Uh, things that I wished I wouldn't remember. So for those vets that are out there and listening to this, I'm so glad you're still here because you actually make life worth living for the rest of us.
Thank you, Charlie, for that message.
You're
Um,
welcome.
wow.
Also, there's something else I'd like to say, and I'll use boat people as an example. The boat people and Vietnam vets have a lot in common. Only and it's the way they were treated once they came here. For the vets, it's back here, and for others, it was when they came over here. Uh, they were treated the same. So vets and the Vietnamese have a lot in common.
Yeah. And, as we sit today in 2026, it's been over 50 years now since the war ended. And there's, a lot of resources, a lot of healing opportunities. And I just came back from a humanitarian trip to Vietnam, almost 3 weeks there, working with Global Village Foundation. And one of the remarkable things is that you can have veterans, boat people, citizens of Vietnam all coming together and finding peace in each other's presence and sharing stories, cultural, foods, that kind of thing. And like, I never thought that I would be sitting at a table with a communist, Viet Cong soldier, right? And embracing his presence. Because for the longest time, that's what I learned was like, oh, if you fought for the North, if you were, a VC, you're bad, whatever. And you know what? It's time to let it go. And I think that's one of the beautiful things that the Vietnamese people have learned to do is, after centuries of wars and suffering, they're like, that's in our past now. We suffered already, but now it's time for peace, it's time for healing, and they truly embrace life and joy. And I hope that's something that, we all can be able to do, however small or large. And podcasts like these and you sharing your story, I think goes a long ways in developing that kinship and that ability to heal, as as we share common stories and experiences together. So Charlie, do you have any final words of wisdom for us? Any other stories or things you'd like to share?
Yeah, let me ask you a question if it's all right.
Yeah, of course.
Did you ever think that this podcast would travel down the road it has?
I was hopeful, but no. And this particular episode in particular, no.
That's what I mean. This episode.
Okay, because I know we had rescheduled at one point, and then we talked about, what are we going to talk about on the podcast? And I'm like, Charlie, don't you worry. I've got questions. You just answer them. And boy, did you answer them. And I think like you just opening up and sharing your heart, your poetry, sharing your story, Cappy's story. I really didn't think you were going to go as deep as you did, but I appreciate that you did because this podcast isn't about promoting a book, right? It's really about what is your story, what's keeping you in the fight to continue so that you can inspire others to not give up on their dreams. And so this episode truly is special because you did that. So, thank you very
Uh,
much.
you're welcome. I'd like to just say one thing to all little kids out there that may be suffering through something similar that I have. They're not living in their birth family. They wonder what happened. You'll be okay. It will get better. It just takes time. Don't give up. And just remember that there are those that love you. It just may take you a while to find them. That's
Yeah,
for all the little ones out there that may be listening.
wonderful. Thank you, Charlie.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you for sharing with us how you turned your pain into poetry and truth into legacy. Listeners, Charlie's story reminds us that healing is not linear and identity is not fixed. So, it's something that we uncover, reclaim, and sometimes completely redefine, right, over the course of a lifetime. From the battlefields of war to the quiet pages of poetry, Charlie shows us that even the deepest wounds can become a source of meaning, and even the most unexpected truths can lead us closer to who we really are. And his journey is a testament to resilience, to creativity, and to the courage it takes to face your past and still choose to move forward. So if this conversation resonated with you, I encourage you to share it with someone who might need to hear it and to explore Charlie's work, Returning Vet's Saga, The Healing Power of Poetry, and his memoir that hopefully will come out one day soon, Cappy's Story. And as always, keep reaching, keep rising, and keep striving for your own quixotic heights. Charlie, thank you again. It has been a pleasure and an honor to have you on this podcast.
Thank you. I feel likewise the same.
Thank you, Charlie.